Hey everybody. So today we're going to kind of bring everything together. Last week we looked at the basics of the JavaScript language. We looked at how to interact with the DOM, the document object model, to make changes to a page after it's been loaded through a JavaScript program. We looked at how to create functions to do that, and then we were running the functions by typing them into the console window on Chrome. But now we're going to look at how to hook up a function to be an event listener for an event. Okay, so we are in section 4 here, events. And the way I want to kind of do this, let me just maybe by way of introducing, let me go back to my tic-tac-toe example. So I have localhost up here, and I have my tic-tac-toe program, which does this. So what we now know is we now know how to create JavaScript functions that can go in and grab a TD element using getElementById, and then can change its style, like the background color here, can change its contents with inner HTML, and so on. There we go. There's a win. So it can change the color to red. What we don't know yet is how to make how to hook up this button to reset the game, to call a function that would do that, and how to hook up these TD elements so that when I click on them, they actually do something and stuff changes on the page. So that's the final piece. And after today's lesson, you will have all the plumbing that you need to be able to go and make this tic-tac-toe app. Whether, it's still tricky to make, but you have all the basic constituent parts of it. So I'm going to show you this I've cooked up this little event examples example here, which is just a page that looks like this, and we can, over here in the console, we can play with it. If you want to take a look at what the code looks like for this, what we've got here are just 4 divs, each with a class of circle. I've given them each an ID so that I can grab them separately and attach events to them, and they're inside of a container. And I used I gave them a height and a width and a background color and a border, and by giving them a high border radius, they end up looking like circles. Border radius gives rounded corners. Oh, I don't need this actually. I'm going to get rid of that. And they're sitting inside of a container which has display flex set, so that they space themselves out nicely and everything works the way it ought to. And I also have margin auto set on that container, which centers everything. Okay, so that's all that's going on in there. That's all we really need to know. There are a bunch of elements here, and we can attach event listeners to them. I've also set it up so that it's going to load eventExamples.js into a script element up here, so that eventually I can add some events in there. But before I do that, let's go take a look here. Now you remember what to do. You remember how to retrieve an item. Let's do a little bit of a review here. So if I can go let e, or how about let div1 variable equal document.getElementById div1, like that. And now I've got div1. I've retrieved it. And playing over here, I can actually see which one I've retrieved. And then I can change stuff about it. div1.innerHTML equals hi. Puts just some text content inside of it. div1.style how about background color? Background color equals how about aqua? So I can change the color of it and so on. Okay, so that's the basic DOM manipulation stuff that we looked at. But what I want to do is I want to create a function that does stuff like this. So let's reload the page. So we're back to the beginning again. Let's create a function. Actually, let's do it in a JavaScript file. So what I need here is I need a new text document, and I'm going to rename it to .js, eventExamples.js, like that. Yes, I want to change the extension. So there we go. So now this event examples is being hooked to here. So I'm going to create a function in here, function change color, and we'll do exactly that. We'll do event. Actually, no, we don't need that just yet. Let's leave that out for a moment. So function change color, and I can go let e equals document dot get element by ID div1, and then go e dot style dot background color equals aqua, like that. Okay, there we go. So let's take a look at the result of that. When I reload this page, I now should be able to call the change color function to change that first div so that it's aqua. Okay, and I can't change it back. That's it. It's a one-time thing. Okay, so I've got a function that reaches into the DOM and changes stuff. Now I want to hook it up so that maybe when I click on that div, it actually calls that function. So what I can do is I've got the change color function. Let me show you how to do it over here in the console. I'm going to go let e equals document dot get element by ID div1, like that. And then I'm going to go e dot, and the function is add event listener. Add event listener. And then I've got, this thing takes 2 parameters, and this is where we immediately get into the stuff I was talking about in the last lesson about functions as values, because we're going to pass the change color function to this function, to this method. So add event listener, but first thing we have to do is give a string which tells us the type of event. So let's make it the click event, and I'm going to pass the change color function like that. Okay, so now I have hooked up, I went and got that element, div1 over here. I've hooked it up so that I've added an event listener to it, which is this function, change color, and that function is going to call when I click it. So let's try it. Click. There you go. It called the function automatically. Pretty cool, huh? So that's not all there is to it. There's more to it than that, but let's go back to our code here. So I've got my function. Now what I want to do is I can do it a number of ways, but let me go let e equal, let me get the document like this, and then I'm going to go e dot add event listener, click, comma, change color, like that. So now I'm going to try and do it automatically. Now I'm warning you right now, this is not going to work, and I'll explain why in a second, but I mean this is the exact same code that I typed into. If I copy this, if I reload over here, yeah, you can see I'm getting an error for that code. Oh, sorry, I've already declared E, so I have to do it like this. But it does work. But there's a problem. Uncaught type error, cannot read property add event listener of null from my event examples file 7. So the problem here is that if you look over here, think about the browser reading this code. It starts at the top and it interprets the HTML code and it builds the DOM as it goes. So when it gets to the script element, it's built the HTML element, the head element, the title, and these 2 meta elements. And now it's being asked to it stops now and immediately executes the event examples code. So one of the things that asks it to do is define a function, which is fine, that goes well. But when it gets to here, get element by ID div1, the problem is that element's down here and we're up here executing the code. We haven't seen that yet. The browser hasn't built that element yet. So this gets null and this becomes null.addEventListener, and that's where we get the error message from, cannot read property of null over here. Okay, so that is what is going on. Now how do we fix it? There's a couple of ways to fix it. One way, and some programmers like this style, is to put your script element right at the end, maybe the last element in the body like that. So that means that the code will execute after most of the relevant parts of the DOM have been created. And then that does work. If I click here now, yay, it's hooked up, right? But I think a better solution, and one that allows us to keep our script elements in the head of the document where arguably they belong. The head is the place for information about the document. So style information, meta information, the title, stuff that doesn't appear on the page. And the body is arguably the right place to put elements that display on the screen. So the script doesn't really belong there, even though some people do put it there. So what we're going to do is we're going to do it a different way. We are going to create essentially a main method, and here's what it looks like. So we're going there's an object, just like there's an object called document. There's an object called window, which stands for the whole frame around the pane that we're in. So the window object, I believe, is this inner pane here. So that's the window object, and we're going to add an event listener to it for the load event. Okay, so this is add event listener, but we're going to add it for the load event. And typically what we do here is we just put an anonymous function in there. So if you remember, I'm going to go Alt-Shift-F here. So this is what our code looks like now. So last week we looked at the fact that, so for example, when we were doing set interval, we were able to not just put a function name. So this is the same method here. Here we passed a function name. We defined the function here and passed it there. Here we're defining an anonymous function. So this whole thing here, from beginning to end, is the second argument to add event listener. And this is where our code is going. Now this load event fires, it waits until the DOM is constructed, and then the load event fires. That's what's going to happen. So the browser is going to come in, it's going to read this script element, it's going to say, okay, I have a function here that's defined, but I have to wait. I don't call it yet, I call it once the load event has fired. And then it goes and continues to create the rest of the page, and when it gets to the bottom, that's when the load event fires. So when it fires, we know that the entire DOM has been created, and it's safe to try and retrieve elements from the DOM. Okay, so essentially what we've got is this is kind of like a main method. So this is going to go into all of our code pretty much from now on. The effect of that, the other thing that's going on here, and I said we were going to do this all the time, is that we are declaring a function inside that function. So that's another consequence of having functions as values, is that, and function names as variable names. Change color now is a local variable inside of this function here. Okay, so let's make sure that it worked. Click, it worked. So this time it works with it just works. That's articulate. Okay. So hopefully you followed me this far. Just to review, we now have a special little piece of syntax that's going to get wrapped around all of our code from now on, which is to say we want to delay the execution of our code. Our code is inside of an anonymous function, and we're going to delay the execution until the DOM has been built. That way we can put our script element anywhere we want, and we don't have to worry about getting null back from getElementById because the thing is not built yet. And what we've got here is we've got an example of adding a function as a listener to div1. Now I could just put an anonymous function here, and sometimes that's useful, but maybe I want to add this change color function to another div. So I could do that like this. I could say, now let's add it to div2. So this one adds it to div1, declares the variable e, adds an event listener for div1. This one goes and gets div2 and adds the same event listener. So when I reload over here, if I click div2, that one goes aqua. And if I reload, if I click div1, it also goes aqua. That's pretty cool too, but it's probably not quite what I wanted. Probably what I want is a function that I can add to all of these divs, that when I click these divs, they will go aqua. So that the div that I clicked will go aqua. So the reason why that's not working right now is that inside the function I've hard coded it to get div1, but there's a better way. So if I get rid of that, I can use the this keyword. So what happens when you add an event listener is basically I'm adding this function, and it becomes a method of the object e. So if you think object oriented here, here I'm retrieving an object from the DOM. That object has a bunch of instance variables and methods associated with it. And this is a trick to add a special method to it. So if instead of going and I don't need to go and get I don't need to go and get the element from the DOM when this function is called, because this function is a method of the object that I want to change. And just like in Java, there's a this keyword. So if I do it like this, let's see what effect that has. Click, click, So now I added the same function to both of these things, both of these div elements, but because of the use of the this keyword, it's the one that gets clicked that's going to have the change made to it. Okay? So anytime you're adding a function and you want the function to have an effect on the thing that was the target of the event, then you use the this keyword. And that works in the vast majority of cases. Occasionally there are some times where you might want to use a different way of accessing that object, but generally speaking it will work. So so I can add this same event to all 4 objects. So I can just copy and paste that code, div3, div4. There we go, boom. Or I could have done a query selector all and gotten by class circle, so query selector all for dot circle, and then I could have used a loop to do this. But having done this, I can now click any of them and it will make them turn aqua. Okay, so that's pretty cool. That's the basic idea. That's how JavaScript programs process input and output. They receive events from the user, and when those events happen, functions fire in response and do stuff. There's different kinds of events as well. So there's the click event. Here's a fun one. Maybe we'll leave that one as a click. Make this a mouse over event. So if I change that to mouse over for div2, if I reload, as soon as the mouse enters the bounding box, it's going to turn aqua. And maybe I want it to turn back to the original color, which is azure, I think. Let me see. Yes, the original color is azure. Maybe call that azure. If I want it to turn back, I could do this. e.add event listener mouse leave. Is that right? I think it's mouse out, actually, not mouse leave. Don't be fooled by what's there. So I want a new function now that'll change the color back to the way that it was before. This time, instead of defining the function up here, I'm gonna pass it as a function literal. So I can say function like this, and then I can put it. I can put the code into here. I can say this dot style dot background color equals azure, which was the original color. Okay, so reload. So these guys are still clicks. When I click on them, and I can't click them back. This one now, let's see if it works. I mouse in, I mouse out. In, out, in, out. Pretty cool, huh? And for debugging purposes, feel free to put console.log statements into here. Mouse out. And here we can go console.log. It's a really good idea to put a console.log statement at the beginning of each of your functions, just to let you know that the function got called. Because when things don't work in JavaScript, okay, let's see if this works. See, change color called, mouse out, change color called, mouse out. Click here, change color called, and so on. The reason why that's a good idea is because when things don't work, so you write some code and it doesn't do what you expected, usually just nothing happens and you have no indication of what went wrong. So if you have, so debugging output is very much your friend. I'm a big fan of debugging output. I actually prefer debugging output most of the time to debuggers. That's just my personal preference. So I tend to litter my code with console.log statements, which I then remove later. And they can easily be removed with a search and replace. Control H, I can say, take console log and replace it with this, console.log, like that, and replace all, and now there's no more debugging output. And if I want to put it back, I can just do this, reload, and now it's back. Okay, so so the user never sees it anyway, because the user never has this pane open, but it does slow things down a bit, so it's best to remove it after you're done. Okay, mouse in, mouse out, clicks. We got a lot going on here. Let's take a look at the guide. So the guide walks you through this in a different way. It tells you to go take a look at this other code. So let's go back here to Module 3 code. And there were these DOM examples. This one right here. And when you open this, oops, it's a bit zoomed in. Hold on. It gives you a bunch of commands to try. So there's, for example, change picture, which grabs that element, that image element, and changes the source attribute so that it's loading the bird picture. And there's also drop heading, which is a bit fancier. It uses a set interval command to change the format here, the style, and then animate it. So that was the DOM examples, and you can do stuff like you can do so the pic has an ID of pic. The picture has an ID of pic. So I can go document dot get element by ID pic dot add event listener. Notice I didn't use the how about mouse over, comma, change picture. So there you go. So notice I'm not using the intermediate variable this time. Instead of storing this in a variable, I'm just chaining on. So this returns this. If I've got this right, this will return the element for the picture, and then I'm adding the mouse over. Actually, let's make it a different event. How about double click? So there's a double click event like that. So that's going to add. If I click one time, nothing. If I double click, it changes to a bird. So there's a bunch of functions here that you can add to this example. And I've done that over here in, where is it? Oh, in listener examples. So same file, but there's a bunch of things going on. I've got a mouse over and a mouse out, changing it from the bird to the other picture. If I click the heading, it calls drop heading. If I click it again, it'll do it again. And there's something else going on here as well. Inside the image, as I mouse around the image, can you see the numbers at the bottom there? So this is linked to a mouse move event. So if we take a look at that code here, module 3 code, listener examples, let's open that, and let's also open this. So this just loads listener examples here, JS/listener examples. I've got my ID of pic. Where is it? I'm adding a click and a mouse over and a mouse out function, just like I added for you guys, using the this keyword to change the source attribute. And then I've got this add event listener for a different kind of event, for mouse move. And I'm linking that to the function mouse location, which is down here, which is actually defined down here. That's okay, by the way. You can define the functions afterwards, and it's fine. I do document.getElement by ID first div.innerHTML. So I'm getting first div, which is this item right here, which starts with the value 0, 0. And what's different about this function is I'm getting the event object. So most of the functions that I created for you, I didn't bother to put a parameter in here. But whenever a function is called as an event listener, there's an event object created, just like in Java, just like in C#. In any event-driven system, when an event happens, there's an event object created that represents all the information that's relevant about that event, and it gets passed to the listener. Because JavaScript is so flexible, I don't have to receive the parameter if I don't want to. I don't have to put a parameter here. But if I want to, I can put the event parameter here, and then I have access to the event object, which will give me, for example, the location that the event happened, which is event.clientX and .clientY. We won't use that all that much here, but it's useful to know because you can get all kinds of information out of it. So that's how I am recording the position of the mouse as I move, as the event moves. If I go back to my example that I built for you, I could add, for example, to change color. I could add the event object here, and I could, console.log the event object so that we can take a look at it and see what's in it. Let's go back here to my event 3 examples, and then when I click, you see what I get is, this is really nice, this debugging features over here. I get a mouse event. It tells me which button was clicked. Button 0 was clicked. It tells me the X and Y location of where I clicked. It tells me whether the control key was down. So did the person control click or did they shift click? If that's true, then they shift clicked, and so on. So if I click this again, I'll get another event. Let me right click it. Sorry, right click. Oh, I can't right click. What can I do? I can middle click. No, I can't. Okay, I can't do that much. But let me hold down Control Shift and click. Now I get a new mouse event. And this time Control key is true and Shift key is true as well. And you can see a bunch of coordinates and stuff like that, which can be useful. The other thing you get from this is the target, which is usually the same as this. So it's the target object that was the target of the event. So that's another way to retrieve the target object, is event.target. There are some weird cases where the target is not the same as this. So if there's a paragraph in here and I click it, I've clicked the paragraph and I've clicked the div, but I can't remember exactly how it does this, to be honest, off the top of my head. But it's possible that the target was the paragraph that I clicked, but because the event was linked to the div, it passed the event on, because the paragraph is part of the div, it passes that event on after it processes the click on the paragraph, and then the target is the paragraph, but this is the div. Did that make sense? If that didn't make sense, don't worry about it. It's not a big issue that you're going to have to deal with very often. Okay, so the click event, the mouse over event, mouse out, passing an anonymous function, use of the this keyword, etc., etc. Here's a list of event types. So I showed you click and double click. I showed you mouse over, mouse out, mouse move. The only others that I've listed here are mouse down and mouse up. There's a million other events, but we're just dealing with mouse events right now. We'll do some keyboard stuff in the next lesson. So mouse down and mouse up are for when the mouse button goes down and when it comes back up. And this is the event object, and it gives you some examples of stuff you can get out of the event object. So if you want to know all the information about the event, you can receive the event parameter. You can call this whatever you want. You can call it E or X or event or whatever, and then you can access a bunch of the instance variables for the data that's stored in it. And if you want more info on that, let me check if this still works. Yeah. So this gives you the full mouse event information and how to get information out of it. And then the last thing here in the guide is about the load event, which I already told you about. So I chose to do things in a slightly different order here. But we're going to just put all of our code inside this Windows load event from now on. Oh, and finally, a couple of tips here. I'll let you guys read this, making things look clickable. So, for example, over here, yeah, these divs don't really look clickable. Like nothing. This one kind of looks clickable because it's kind of got a hover effect. I mean, you can achieve this same effect obviously with a hover style in CSS, but it does make it look clickable. So when things change when you mouse over them, that makes things look clickable. Let me go back to Module 3 code, listener examples. See, there's nothing indicating, well, actually there is. I have done something here. So I've done something here to indicate that this is clickable. If I were to, in my code over here, I've got an H1 element here. Let me give it an ID, header. If I go back into here and I go E equals document dot get element by ID header, and then I go E dot add event listener, click function, this dot inner HTML, don't click me. There we go. So, and then I should put a semicolon here because this is a regular statement. So that really does deserve a semicolon, just like I put one here. So let's go back up here. Let's go to my example, event examples. So there's nothing that makes it look clickable when I mouse over here. But when I click it, inner HTML is not a function. I'm moving too fast here. Inner HTML equals don't click me. Always debug. So there's a good example. I click, if I didn't have this open, I click there and just nothing happens, right? So at least when I have the console open, I can see any errors that are gonna be thrown, and I can also put in some debugging output to see. So when I click and nothing happens, if I don't have this open, I don't even know if my function got called. So console.log in the function will tell me yes or no whether the function actually got called, and that can help me zero in on the problem. So now when I click it, it is clickable, but it doesn't look clickable. So there's some tips which I'll let you guys take a look at here. on how to make things more clickable. You can make things buttons. You can change the CSS cursor. You can use hover in a CSS rule and so on. So, so a bunch of tips there I'll let you guys review. And there's a debugging tip here, which is something you could use. Let me see if I can concoct an example here of something not working. So if I go, let's say I accidentally left this as aqua. So now I've got, what that'll do is it doesn't seem to be working over here. It doesn't seem to be, the mouse out part seems to be broken. Oh no, wait, that's not a good example. Let's say I broke this one. Let's get rid of all this stuff here. Okay, so so I broke the mouse in function, the one that I'm clicking on here. Okay, I may want to be able to try and run it on its own. I had a function called change color, but I can't run it right now. I might want to see, okay, what was in my E variable that I was using? No good, not defined. The reason being, let me just put this stuff back the way that it was, so when I upload it, it'll be still good. The reason why I can't access any of that stuff is because I've put it inside of a local function here. So it's become, all my code is now part of a load event listener on the window object. So all of these things here are local variables. So the trick is, if I want to, there's a little trick I can pull. If I want to be able to see what E is and access it in my console, I can get rid of the let. So the let is a definitional thing that lets me define a variable so that it's local to the current context. If I remove that, then let's reload this. Now I can access E and I can see what it contains. Similarly with my functions, if I change this to use the let syntax, let change color equal function, which is the alternate syntax for defining functions, and then I remove the let like this, the effect of that is if you define a variable without the let keyword, it will become global. So now I can also access my change color function. It's also global as well. Hopefully everything's still working here. Yeah, everything's working. Okay. So just a little debugging tip there. But it's best practice is to use the let keyword in here. By the way, you may also, if you're going out into the wild, you might see var everywhere. That's kind of the old way of doing things. In the newest versions of Java, we prefer let. The differences between them, you wouldn't notice with the kind of coding that we're doing, but let gives block level versus function level scope. You can look that up if you want. It gives you a variable scope that's more like Java or C#. Otherwise, it's just function level scope. Feel free to Google all that, or you can ask me in class. The other thing it gets you is it gets you some technical stuff about the way that variables are bound in something called a closure, which is something that'll be more useful to you probably if you go on to take the the front-end web development course. The choice of let versus var can sometimes make a big difference when you're doing some of the more kind of advanced coding. So generally speaking, I think most JavaScript developers are of the opinion that we should be using let and not var. So this is another thing, a little standards thing in this course. We're going to use let. So even if you're borrowing snippets of code from elsewhere or whatever, make sure you change the vars to lets. Okay, so that's everything that I wanted to talk to you guys about. There's a few exercises that I would like you to try. There's a bit less videos this week, so I want you to try. I really think you should give some of these a real try. So the 1 and 2 are pretty straightforward. The first one, just ask a question. The sky is blue, true or false. Give them 2 buttons, true or false. Attach a click handler to each one, and if they click true, display a success message. If they click false, display a fail message. So that's just a get your feet wet activity. You should all try it. Make sure you can do it. Don't forget to use the Windows load event handler. This one's a bit more complicated. Let's see, I think I have a solution for this. So the solution code, of course, as always, is all available. Here we go. Exercise 2, part 4, I think is this one. Nope. I think I've renumbered everything, so I don't have the exercises with the right numbers anymore. Oh, here it is. So yeah, sorry, I'm going to have to renumber all these exercises, but you know, true, correct, false, wrong. This is 2 exercises in one. The second exercise has a big number here, and you're supposed to keep track of the number and allow the user to count by 1s and by 5s here. So these are 2 buttons that do that. So that's exercise 2. Exercise 3 is one of my favorites. It's catch the rabbit. Where are we? So catch the rabbit. So there's some starter code for this. So in the module 3 code, if you go to catch the rabbit, you get this. So catch the Easter bunny to get your egg. There's a bunch of rabbit images here. Let's do a view page source. And then a couple of messages. So I think the first time, this is an old exercise for me, but I always liked it. And I think the first time I made it, it was around Easter time, you know, where the Easter bunny supposedly leaves eggs or whatever. People do Easter egg hunts. So that's why it's Easter themed with a rabbit. So there's 4 images here. They each have a different ID. There's a couple of messages that also have IDs. And it's linking to catchtherabbit.js, which you have to fill in. And what you're supposed to make it do, let's go back to the solutions, is this. So don't look at the solution. So when you start, it should look like that. So most of the messages and the rabbits are hidden. And when I try to catch the rabbit, it moves. And it counts the number of times I've tried to catch it. And after 4 attempts, it says no Easter eggs for you. And if I keep trying, after 20 attempts, I think, it says the other message, humans are dumb, the rude message. Okay, so so that's what you're supposed to make it do. I think there's a couple of tips on how to do it. There's comments and stuff at the top of the page. So if we go back and look at module 3 code, catch the rabbit, and do a view page source, here it is. So it sort of explains what you're supposed to do. And there's a hint here about how to make things appear and disappear without changing all the other elements on the page so that they still take up space. So that's pretty cool. And then the last one is the move me, which this is the starter code. You have a div inside of a div. And if you look at the solutions, move me buttons. This is the latest one. Now I've got 4 buttons, which I've put symbols on in a very crude way, just by using slashes and greater than and less than signs. But it actually keeps track of where the object is and moves it around. So all of this example, the counting example, the catch the rabbit example, they have a few variables that track the state of the system. So the catch the rabbit example is counting how many times you've tried to catch the rabbit. This one is keeping track of the location of the ball here and moving it around. So I think you should try all of these exercises because they're all good, and we can debrief them in the live class. And really the only thing left for us to look at in this whole module is to look at the use of forms in a JavaScript app. So using forms which we already know about forms, but we're going to use them in a different way to provide inputs for a JavaScript program. All right, so take some time after this video and try these exercises before you go on to the next one. Okay, there's fewer videos this week, so I want you to spend a little bit more time writing some code. Okay, so best of luck, and I will see you in the next video and then in class.